Hello, fantasy football fans. It's fantasyendzone.com. Let me start by saying if you're not dominating your fantasy football league, it's obvious you need to get into the end zone. fantasyendzone.com. Today's topic is going to be 5 wide receivers to watch this year in fantasy football. Let me start off the list with number 1, Andre Johnson. This guy is the go-to guy in the Houston offense. He's a game breaker. All he did was rank number 1 in the league in receiving with 115 catches for 1,575 yards and 8 touchdowns. He averaged 98.4 yards per game, and his longest catch was for 65 yards. Teams will work their defensive game plan on trying to stop him. He was probably the first receiver taken last year's draft, and he will again this year. Good speed and good hands equals the best wide receiver in the game. Number 2, we have Greg Jennings. This will surprise some people. He has a great surrounding cast around him, a solid quarterback, and a good running game. That usually spells opportunity for wide receivers. He had 80 catches with 1,292 yards last year with 9 touchdowns. He averaged 80.8 yards per game, and his longest catch was for 63 yards. He can stretch the field with his speed. Number 3 is Calvin Johnson. This guy has freakish ability with his freakish size. He stands at 6 feet 5 inches and weighs around 230 pounds. He has great hands and good speed. Quarterbacks can just throw the ball up high in the air and he can go get it. He had 78 catches for 1,331 yards with a league high 12 touchdowns. He averaged 83.2 yards per game, and his longest catch was a 96-yard touchdown pass. He did all this while playing on one of the worst teams in the league. If the team improves just a little bit, he could be a steal. Another thing that will come into play is if Matthew Stafford is able to set into that position and to get comfortable with him, and they can develop a good chemistry, that could be a good duo right there to have. Number 4, we have Reggie Wayne. There's not really any surprise here. When you have Peyton Manning throwing the ball to you, you should have every opportunity to be successful. He had 82 catches for 1,145 yards with 6 touchdowns. He averaged 71.6 yards per game, and his longest catch was a 65-yard touchdown pass. With Austin Collie and Anthony Gonzalez coming back from injury, this only helps his cause. He is a solid pick all around. Number 5, I've selected Deshaun Jackson. I know that a lot of people are ready to read this article and be shocked thinking that he would have been in the top 5. Most would say that he's a very solid number 2 receiver, but he does not have the numbers to move him up into a first receiver. Last year he had 62 catches for 912 yards and 2 touchdowns. I hear you loud and clear. Those are not the kind of numbers you would expect from a number 1 receiver. I do agree. Too many times in fantasy we get caught up in what a player did last year, and we expect those same kind of numbers when we draft that player. However, many factors can set in. Injuries, his team performs poorly, or coaching changes. This will be the year that the Eagles will need to replace Brian Westbrook, and as I've read today, they have released him. They have LaShawn McCoy in the waiting. They will need to throw the ball a little bit more in order to take the pressure off this young back. Last season in many fantasy leagues, in my league, he averaged 10.5 points per game. I would expect that average to be a lot better this year. If he does not go as the number 1 receiver, I will gladly take him as the number 2 receiver. He would be the best number 2 receiver available in my opinion. I know that many of you are wondering why Larry Fitzgerald and Anquan Bolden were not on this list. I'm going to tell you right now, the retiring of Kurt Warner will have a deep effect on the value of the team and Larry Fitzgerald and Anquan Boldin's fantasy value as well. Thank you for tuning in.